The great crystal hall of Varela Prime was silent. Only the soft hum of floating lights filled the air. Billions watched from across the galaxy, from jungle moons to icy stations, all waiting for one name, one choice. Princess Kalira stood tall. Under the sacred beam of starlight, her silver dress shimmering like liquid sky. She was calm outside, but inside, her heart pounded like war drums. It was the day of choosing. The moment every royal child must select a mate to bind two great houses or even empires. 12 noble suitors stood in a half-circle before her. Proud, powerful, glowing in armor, robes, and jewels. Each one was a leader, a warrior, a symbol of strength and bloodlines. Their names were known in songs, carved into walls, feared in battle. But Kalira's eyes didn't linger on them, not for long. She kept glancing toward the side of the hall, where the technicians stood. And among them was a single human, tall, unsure, wearing a simple black utility uniform. His name was Jackson Hale, from Earth, and he didn't even know why he'd been kept inside the hall. He had arrived only to repair a broken royal communications panel. But someone had locked the door behind him. Now he stood still, confused, while every noble eye burned through him with hate and disbelief. Kalira breathed slowly, her fingers gently curled at her side. She remembered the night before, when she had seen him walking alone in the palace gardens. He had helped a lost child find her way, even though no one was watching. He had stopped to touch a dying flower, whispering something soft like it mattered. In that small moment, she saw something in him that none of her suitors ever showed. Soul. The imperial voice called again through the chamber, cold and loud. State your chosen name, princess, so the ritual of union may begin. Kalira closed her eyes. Just for a second, and when she opened them, they were burning with quiet fire. She took one step forward, her voice strong and clear. I choose Jackson Hale of Earth, she said. Time stopped. The crowd gasped so loud it shook the light above them. The nobles looked at each other in disbelief. Some stepped back, some snarled. The emperor, her father, did not move, but his eyes turned to fire. Jackson blinked, pointing to himself in confusion. Me? He whispered. 2 guards moved toward him, not to hurt him, but to guide him to the front. Tradition demanded the chosen mate stand by the princess. He stumbled forward, nervous, shocked, not sure what to say or even how to stand. As he reached her, Kalira turned and gently took his hand. His hand was calloused, rough, not like the soft gloves of nobles. She smiled, and for a moment, everything felt still again. Then the chaos began. One noble shouted, "This is madness, he is a human, a primitive." Another said, "This weak species cannot mix with our royal blood." A third sneered, "He is not even dressed properly. How can this be allowed?" Kalira stepped forward again, her voice sharp as crystal. "I have chosen by the old law, by the rights of soul bond, not by bloodlines." The emperor finally spoke, his voice like thunder. "You dare shame your lineage for this outsider?" She looked at him calmly and said, "I honor my lineage by choosing what your heart has long forgotten, truth." The audience broke into chaos. Some supported her, most did not. Meanwhile, Jackson stood beside her, heart racing, trying to understand what had just happened. He looked up at her and said softly, "Why me?" Kalira didn't look away. She whispered, "Because you were kind when no one was watching." That night, the stars over Varela burned a little brighter, and the galaxy whispered of a human chosen by royalty. The nobles retreated, angry, ashamed, planning behind closed doors. But the people across distant colonies, they saw something else. They saw hope. They saw the idea that maybe a human, just one human, could matter more than power. And the trial of the heart had not even begun yet, because while Kalira had chosen with love, the galaxy would soon respond with fire, and Jackson Hale, a man with no crown, would be forced to prove his soul could carry one. The crystal throne room did not calm after the princess made her choice. In fact, the storm was just beginning. Whispers turned into angry voices became shouts, and soon, The nobles were yelling over each other like wild beasts, Princess. Kalira stood still, her hand still holding Jackson's, her eyes steady and calm. Jackson felt like he was drowning. His heart beating too fast, his mouth dry, his legs weak. He looked around at the sea of aliens staring at him with disgust, confusion, and hatred. None of them saw him as equal. None of them believed he belonged. Guards circled around him quickly. Shields up, weapons glowing, not to hurt but to protect. The Emperor raised one hand and silence crashed over the room like a wave. His voice boomed across the galaxy through the broadcast. This choice is against everything we stand for. Kalira replied, her voice cold but respectful. It is within the law, Father. The council members began talking fast among themselves, their faces full of fear and fury. Kalira was not just any princess. She was the next empress, future ruler of half the galaxy. Her choice of a human meant the ancient bloodlines were broken. One noble, tall and armored in gold, stepped forward and spat. "You shame us, Kalira." She looked at him and said simply, "Then leave." The noble snarled but said nothing more, stepping back, fuming in silence. Jackson was taken from the hall under heavy guard, not to prison, but to a royal chamber deep inside the palace. He sat on the edge of a crystal bench, staring at his shaking hands. He had no idea why this was happening, or what he was supposed to do now, back in the throne room. Kalira stood alone, facing the full fury of the Empire. They tried to pressure her, begged her to change her mind, to choose a noble instead, but she only repeated one thing, again and again, "I choose Jackson Hale." By nightfall, the news had spread to every corner of the known galaxy. Alien broadcasts were filled with debates, interviews, and angry shouting. A human? What power does Earth even have? He's no warrior, he's no genius. She must be under some mind trick. But one channel quietly showed a clip of Jackson helping a lost alien child in the palace garden. It went viral, shared in secret across colonies. And soon, soft voices began to rise. "He's kind," someone whispered. "He doesn't want power. Maybe he's exactly what we need." That night, Kalira visited Jackson's chamber, alone, wearing a plain cloak and no crown. He stood up as she entered, still unsure how to act around her. She smiled and said, "You don't need to bow." He sat down slowly, watching her sit across from him. "Why me?" he asked again, his voice soft, full of fear and doubt. Kalira looked into his eyes and said, "Because you don't pretend, Jackson. You are real. And that's rare in this palace." He laughed bitterly. "I'm just a technician from Earth." "You're more than that," she said. "You see people as people, not tools or threats." They talked for hours, about Earth, about stars, about stories and dreams. She told him of her loneliness, her duty, how every noble she met only cared about control. He told her about fixing machines no one thanked him for, and how he once gave his food to a starving family on a mining moon. Kalira listened with quiet eyes, and something warm bloomed between them. Something real, but outside, danger was building. 3 noble families had already begun planning. Angry and insulted by the princess's choice, they sent spies into the palace, men with dark blades and silent boots. One whispered, "Kill the human before the bonding is sealed." They knew once the royal ceremony happened, no one could stop the union, not even the Emperor. As Kalira left Jackson's room, a silent drone followed her, recording her every move. She did not know yet that her choice had started not just a scandal, but a silent war. Back in his chamber, Jackson looked at the stars through a tall window. He felt small, like a dust speck in space, but something inside him refused to break. Maybe he didn't understand the politics. Maybe he didn't belong in a golden palace. But he had been chosen not for what he had, but for who he was. And if he had to prove he was worthy of Kalira's trust, he would try, even if it cost him everything. In the shadows of the palace, the whispers grew louder. Knives were being sharpened, ships were being armed, and hatred was waking up. But so was something else, hope, and hope. once born in a human heart, does not die easily. Jackson woke early, even before the twin suns of Varela rose. He had barely slept, his mind full of voices, memories, fears, and the quiet sound of Kalira's voice echoing in his heart. He stepped outside onto the balcony, where cool wind touched. His face and the stars still hung in the sky like frozen tears. Down below, the royal gardens were quiet, but guards were hidden behind every tree now. He knew he was being watched. Not just by soldiers, but by the entire galaxy. Still, he did not run. He did not hide. He just stood there, breathing, grounding himself, trying to stay calm in a world that no longer felt real. Inside the palace, Kalira stood before her mother's statue, carved from white crystal. She whispered, "Mother, I hope I'm not wrong." She had read the history scrolls. She had learned the ancient ways, but nothing had prepared her for the storm this choice had brought. Still, her heart had spoken, and she trusted it more than any counsel. Later that morning, she returned to Jackson's chamber, bringing a tray with food he actually recognized: eggs, fruit, and warm bread. Jackson blinked in surprise. Standing quickly, "You brought me breakfast?" Kalira laughed softly. "They offered you steamed thorn beast again." He chuckled, then sat beside her, the warmth between them growing with every moment. They began talking, slowly at first, then more openly, like two people who had known pain, but never stopped hoping. Kalira asked him about Earth, not the governments or fleets, but the people, the life, the feeling of walking under a real blue sky. Jackson spoke with a soft smile, telling her about rainy mornings, street music, warm blankets, and his little sister Layla, who loved to draw spaceships. He told her how Earth was not perfect, but beautiful in its chaos. He shared how he used to fix machines for hours just to help old miners keep their oxygen running. Kalira listened without interrupting, her golden eyes wide and shining. She had grown up in a world of cold control and careful perfection. But here was a man who helped strangers just because it felt right. Why? "Do you care so much for others?" she asked softly. Jackson paused, looking out the window. "Because when I needed help, someone once gave it without asking anything back. I promised I'd pass that forward." That simple answer made her chest ache. This was the soul she had chosen. Not for titles, not for power, but for this deep, quiet strength. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small glowing crystal. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. Jackson shook his head. "It's a bond crystal. It reads emotion, not blood." She handed it to him, and it pulsed gently in his hand like a soft heartbeat. "Only someone whose heart is true can hold it this way," she whispered, suddenly. The door slammed open, and Captain Virik stormed in, armor shining and expression dark. "Forgive me, Princess, but I must speak." Kalira nodded, and Virik turned to Jackson. "You are not safe. There was an attempt planned last night. We stopped it, but they will try again." Jackson stood slowly. "Why?" "I've done nothing. That's why they hate you," Virik growled. "Because you didn't fight for power, and yet you stand closer to the throne than they ever will." Kalira stepped between them. "Then he must be trained." Virik blinked. "Trained? As a royal mate?" "No," she said. "As a protector, as someone who will survive." That evening, Jackson was taken to the palace's secret training ring, used to test nobles in silence. Here, he met warriors from many races. Some respected Kalira, others did not, but all agreed to train him under royal order. He learned how to move, how to block, how to survive. He was slower than them, weaker in some ways, but sharper. He didn't fight with brute force. He used logic, timing, and heart. One instructor said, "He doesn't fight to win, he fights to protect. That makes him dangerous." Meanwhile, Kalira worked day and night to calm the council, but they refused to listen. They gave her an ultimatum: break the bond, or lose support from half the empire. She returned to Jackson that night, her hands trembling for the first time. He saw it, stood close, and simply held her hand without saying a word. She rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, "They want me to give you up." Jackson looked at her, voice soft but firm. "Then don't." The bond crystal in his pocket glowed again, brighter than ever before, and far above, a new message was sent to the nobles in secret. If the human passes the trial of the heart, no one can stop the bond, but if he fails, then we act. In the dark halls of power, knives were being hidden, but in the light of a quiet room, two hearts beat as one, and the Empire did not yet understand that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy was love. Night fell over the shining towers of Varela Prime, and with it came silence. But in the shadows of that silence, danger moved like smoke. While the princess and the human slept peacefully in their separate chambers, others prepared to end the story before it could grow stronger. Three cloaked figures crept through the garden walls, their steps silent, their presence hidden from palace censors. They were not ordinary men. They were trained shadows, silent assassins from noble families who refused to accept the bond. Their orders were clear, simple, final: kill the human. Before the trial of the heart begins, Jackson lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His body was sore from training, his arms bruised, his legs tired, but his mind was wide awake. He remembered Kalira's face that evening, the worry in her eyes, the way she gripped his hand before she left. He didn't know what the trial of the heart truly was, only that it would begin in 3 days, and if he failed, everything would fall apart. He stood up, walked to the window, and took a deep breath, letting the cool wind calm his racing thoughts. Then he heard something, a soft click, not from the door, but from the ceiling vent. He turned slowly, his instincts suddenly alert. A shadow dropped from the ceiling, a blade flashing in its hand. Jackson jumped back, his training kicking in, just enough to dodge the first strike. But a second shadow followed, and a third blocked the door. He was trapped, unarmed, surrounded. One assassin whispered, "No royal blood for you, human." Jackson grabbed the nearest object, a chair, and swung it at the closest attacker. It broke, but slowed the shadow just long enough for Jackson to dash to the side. He dove behind the bed, grabbing a broken metal lamp as his only weapon. The assassins moved in, smooth, deadly, fast. Jackson fought like a cornered animal, no skill, just instinct, heart, and desperation. A blade sliced across his arm, blood flowed, but he didn't stop. He kicked one of them in the knee, sending the attacker crashing into the wall. The door suddenly burst open, and Captain Virak stormed in with palace guards. Blasters fired, stun rounds hit two of the assassins, dropping them cold. The third tried to escape through the window, but Virak threw a stun disc that exploded in blue light. The last attacker dropped. Twitching, unconscious, Jackson stood there, breathing hard, blood dripping from his arm. Virak rushed to his side, checking the wound. "You're lucky," the captain said. "They were professionals, meant to kill quietly." Jackson looked at him, still shaking. "Why does everyone want me dead?" "I haven't done anything." Virak stared at him for a long moment, then said, "That's exactly why you didn't bribe, lie, or threaten anyone. You simply exist. And she chose you. That threatens their power." Kalira arrived moments later, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She ran to Jackson without thinking, gripping his bloody hand, ignoring the shocked stares of the guards. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice cracking. Jackson nodded slowly. "Yeah, thanks to your captain." Kalira turned to Virak, her voice now full of fire. "I want every noble visitor questioned, every door watched, every shadow lit." Virak bowed. "It will be done, princess." Jackson sat down slowly, his body aching, the adrenaline fading. Kalira sat beside him, not speaking, just holding his hand. They stayed like that for a while, surrounded by broken furniture and unconscious assassins. But the silence between them was stronger than fear. Later, when the healers cleaned his wounds and gave him medicine, Jackson looked at Kalira and asked, "Is this going to keep happening?" She didn't lie, she didn't pretend, she just nodded. "Yes, until the trial ends, or until we prove them wrong." "Then I better not fail," he said, trying to smile through the pain. Kalira touched his cheek gently and whispered, You won't. The next day, the emperor called an emergency council. He stood before the nobles, holding one of the assassin's weapons in his hand. My daughter's choice will be protected by the crown. Any further attack will be seen as treason. The nobles did not cheer. They did not clap. They only nodded, hiding their hatred behind smiles. The game had changed, but it was far from over. Whispers moved across the stars again, some voices mocking the human, others praising him for surviving. He's not dead. He fought back. Maybe he's not so weak after all. But in one dark chamber, a noble lord spoke to his assassin commander. Fail again, and I will deal with the human myself. The shadows were still moving, but so was Jackson Hawley, and this time, he wasn't just surviving, he was preparing. The trial of the heart was not just a tradition, it was a storm wrapped in ceremony. It tested more than blood or muscle. It tested will, pain, truth, and soul. For thousands of years, nobles had passed it with ease, trained since birth for each task. But this time, the galaxy leaned in closer than ever before. Because the challenger was human, and the princess stood beside him, Jackson Hawley wore no armor, only a black training suit and a badge marked with Kalira's crest. He stood in the great arena, the twin suns shining down on his face. Around him sat nobles, royals, warriors, and millions watching through the star screens across the empire. Some cheered for him, most did not, but all watched. A tall judge with 6 golden eyes raised a staff and shouted, "Let the trial of the heart begin." The first test was simple in design but brutal in practice, the path of endurance. Jackson had to carry a weight twice his size across a burning crystal bridge while acid rain fell from above. Others had trained for this since childhood. Jackson had only weeks. He gritted his teeth, lifted the weight with shaking arms, and walked forward as fire licked at his boots. The pain was sharp, but his focus was stronger. He didn't think of winning. He only thought of her Kalira, who believed in him when no one else did. With each step, the nobles whispered, expecting him to fall. But Jackson kept going, his back burning, legs shaking, heart roaring. When he reached the end, he collapsed, but with the weight still in his hands. The crowd went silent, then some began to clap slowly. Unsure, but real, Kalira, watching from the royal box, wiped away a silent tear. The next test was the maze of memory, a psychic trap that showed a challenger their deepest fears. Jackson stood in the center of the glowing maze, where shadows danced and voices whispered from the walls. He saw Earth burning, his sister crying, his own hands covered in blood. He dropped to his knees, the pain inside worse than any wound. But he remembered Kalira's words, "Your past does not define your future." He stood up again, faced the memory, and walked through it. The maze faded behind him, and the judges marked him worthy. Then came the hardest trial, the duel of choice. Jackson would face a noble challenger in front of the entire empire. The chosen noble was Lord Varn, a warrior bred from birth. Skin like steel, eyes like fire, Varn stepped into the ring, laughing. "This will be over in seconds." Jackson took his stance, holding a simple practice blade, his hands sweating. The bell rang, and Varn charged like a machine. Jackson dodged barely, using speed and brains, not strength. He couldn't overpower Varn, but he could outlast him. Each time Varn struck, Jackson rolled, ducked, stepped aside. The crowd began to shout, not in anger, but in surprise. He's still standing. He's reading the fight. He's not just lucky, he's learning. Varn grew angry, slashing harder. But that made him reckless. Jackson waited, breathed, then used one perfect move, sliding under the noble's blade and knocking Varn to the ground. He didn't stab, didn't kill, just placed his blade gently on Varn's chest. The crowd rose to their feet, unsure what to feel. The judge raised a hand and shouted. Trial passed. Kalira's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with pride and shock. Jackson stepped out of the ring, limping, breathing hard, but standing. The emperor himself nodded once, just slightly. That nod meant more than 1,000 words, but the trial was not yet over. The final challenge was not a fight or a puzzle, it was a question. Jackson stood before the council and was asked, "Why do you believe you are worthy to stand beside our princess?" He didn't speak right away. He looked around at the nobles, the judges, the sky, then to Kalira, and then he said, "I don't come from royal blood. I don't have fleets or armies, but I have a heart that does not give up, and a soul that believes love is stronger than fear. I didn't ask to be chosen, but now that I have been, I will protect her, stand beside her, and never shame her." Silence followed, deep and full. Then one old judge whispered, "That was the truest answer I've heard in 100 years. The council stamped the seal, and the arena lit up with golden light. Kalira ran to him without waiting for permission. Her arms wrapping around him, he held her back gently. As the galaxy watched in stunned silence, for the first time in recorded history, a human had passed the trial of the heart, and the empire would never be the same again. The arena had gone quiet. Too quiet. Jackson stood in the center, still holding Kalira's hand. He had passed every trial, stood against pain, fear, and even a warrior born for battle, but he did not smile, not yet, because he saw the tension in the air, the way nobles whispered with sharp eyes. The moment was beautiful, yes, but also dangerous. Up in the highest box, the emperor stood slowly, his golden robe moving like flowing fire. The galaxy watched as he stepped forward, his voice deep and powerful. "By the old laws, and by the will of the stars, the trial of the heart is past. Jackson Holly of Earth is now worthy." Some nobles clapped politely, others stayed silent, but no one dared protest, at least not yet. Kalira smiled through her tears, proud and fierce, but down in the crowd, one noble was not smiling at all. Lord Kor, the same man who sent assassins in the night, gripped his blade beneath his robe. He had lost everything: status, respect, and the future he planned for his own son. He refused to watch a human sit beside the princess. As the guards turned to escort Kalira and Jackson out of the arena, Lord Kor stepped forward and shouted, "This is not over. I challenge the human to blood duel, now." Gasps echoed across the arena. A blood duel was not part of the trial. It was a final act, an ancient rite of nobles. Kalira moved in front of Jackson. He passed the trials. "This is madness." But the emperor raised a hand, his face unreadable. "He may refuse." The emperor said quietly. Jackson looked at Kalira, then at Kor, whose eyes burned with hate. He had every right to walk away, to rest, to celebrate. But he saw the truth in that moment. If he ran, they would never stop coming. So he nodded once, slowly. "I accept." The arena gates closed again, and silence fell like snow. A blood duel was not just a fight, it was life or death. No weapons could be refused, no mercy expected. Jackson picked up a blade, heavier than the one he used before. Kor unsheathed a long red sword that hummed with power. Kalira watched, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. The bell rang and Kor struck first. Fast and brutal, Jackson barely blocked the first hit, his arms nearly giving out. The second strike cut across his shoulder, blood pouring down his arm. But he stayed standing, his legs firm, his eyes focused. He didn't fight like a noble, he fought like a man who refused to fall. He dodged under Kor's next attack and rolled, then struck low, hitting Kor's leg. The noble roared in pain. Swinging wildly, Jackson stepped back, breathing hard, blade trembling in his hand. Kor laughed darkly. "You don't belong here, human. You're just a glitch in history," Jackson whispered. "Then I'll be the glitch that changed everything." With a sudden burst of speed, Jackson charged. Using every bit of strength he had left, he ducked, spun, and drove his blade into Kor's side. The noble dropped to his knees, gasping, blood spilling onto the arena floor. Jackson stepped back. Not finishing him, just watching. The judge walked forward and shouted, "The blood duel is ended. Jackson Holly stands victorious." The crowd exploded, half in cheers, half in shock. Kalira ran down the steps, not caring for rules or order, and threw her arms around Jackson. He nearly collapsed in her arms. Bleeding, broken, but smiling, the emperor stood once more. this time louder, stronger. Let the galaxy know this human has earned his place beside my daughter, and any hand raised against him from this moment forward shall face the wrath of the throne. Fireworks exploded in the sky. Great ships lit up the heavens, and across every star system, people cheered or cursed, but no one ignored what had just happened. A human, born on a small blue planet, had stood against the greatest names in the Empire and won. The nobles left the arena, some in shame, others in fear, a few in secret respect. In the days that followed, Jackson healed in silence, Kalira never leaving his side. They spoke of the future, of unity, of hope. Whispers began to shift. Voices once full of hate now said words like courage, change, and worthy. But not everyone accepted peace. Ships moved in secret, and darker plans formed in distant systems. For some, the idea of a human prince was too much to bear. And as the royal bonding ceremony neared, the galaxy held its breath again. Because love had won the arena, but war might still come to the palace. The stars above Varela Prime shimmered brighter than ever before. The palace was glowing with silver lights. Music floated through the sky, and golden banners danced in the wind. It was the day of the royal bonding. The final step to seal the union between Princess Kalira and Jackson Hale. Crowds gathered across the cities. Billions watched from far-off worlds, some with joy, others with silent judgment. But no one could ignore it now. This was real, inside the palace. Jackson stood before a mirror, dressed in ceremonial robes, trimmed in black and silver. He touched the collar gently, still not used to how heavy respect could feel. His shoulder was still sore, his body covered in healing scars, but he stood tall. Captain Virik entered the room, nodding with rare pride. "You look like someone who belongs here," he said. Jackson smiled slightly. "Funny. I still feel like a mechanic with a lucky punch." Virik chuckled. "You were chosen, you survived, and you fought. No luck there." Kalira stood in a separate chamber, her gown glowing like starlight, her crown set lightly on her head. She looked out the window, watching the sky, thinking of everything that had happened, assassins, duels, trials, and now, finally, this moment. An attendant whispered, "Are you ready, princess?" Kalira turned, eyes full of strength. "I've been ready since the day I chose him." The bonding ceremony began in the Great Hall, where rulers of 20 star systems sat in golden seats. Jackson entered first, walking down the long path of light, every step echoing through the chamber. Kalira followed, her steps soft, her smile steady. They met at the center, under the ancient star flame, a blue fire that only appeared for true unions. The flame flickered the moment they stood together, then grew brighter. The Emperor stood before them, his face calm, his voice deep. "Do you, Jackson Hale of Earth, vow to protect the Empire, not with fear, but with love?" "I do," Jackson said, his voice clear. "And do you, Kalira of the Royal Bloodline, vow to stand beside him, not as ruler alone, but as partner and heart?" "I do," she said, not looking at anyone but him. The star flame burst upward, a signal that the bond had been sealed by the ancient laws. The crowd rose, some clapping, some simply stunned. Kalira and Jackson turned to face them, now joined, not just as mates, but as a symbol of something new. Later, in the private gardens, they sat beneath the moonlight, finally alone. Jackson looked at her, still amazed. "We actually did it." Kalira leaned her head against his shoulder. "We did. They hated me," he whispered. "Some still do. Let them," she said softly. "They will learn, or they will fall behind." Suddenly, a message came through Virik's personal communicator, his voice urgent. "Princess enemy ship spotted near the border. One of the noble houses has declared rebellion." Kalira stood immediately. "Fire." In her eyes, Jackson followed, already reaching for his armor. "It was never going to be easy," he said. "But it will be ours," she replied. Together they entered the command chamber, side by side. Kalira gave quick, sharp orders, showing the galaxy why she was not just royal but born to rule. Jackson, though still new to command, offered strategy from a human point of view, fast, flexible, and unexpected. Within hours, their united forces stopped the rebellion before it reached full fire, and when the noble house begged for mercy, Kalira gave it, but stripped them of title. Jackson said nothing during the judgment, but later asked her, "Why not destroy them?" "Because we are building something new," she said, "and a new future must leave room for change, even in those who failed us." Whispers spread again, but this time they were not of hate. They were of balance, strength, love, and peace. Jackson became known not just as the human prince, but as the heart of steel. He traveled with Kalira to distant systems, meeting rulers, calming tensions, and opening trade with planets Earth had never dreamed of reaching. Children of many species grew up hearing their story, not just of power, but of kindness. Kalira once said to a young student, "He didn't win with swords, he won with truth." And Jackson would laugh and add, "She won me with her fire." Years passed, but the moment she said, "I choose him," was still told across the stars. Because it wasn't just about love, it was about standing against a system and daring to be different. And together, they changed an empire, not by blood, not by war, but by choosing each other.